In 1990, Disney released Pretty Woman, one of the most beloved romantic comedies of all time. People remember the smiles, the shopping scenes, and the iconic chemistry between Julia Roberts and Richard Gere. But behind the glitz and glamour, there's a version of this movie that almost never saw the light of day, one that was so dark and heartbreaking, test audiences cried for all the wrong reasons. The story began with a much harsher reality. The original script, titled 3000, was not a romantic fantasy at all. It was a painful look at money, greed, and broken people trying to survive in Los Angeles. In that version, Vivian wasn't a confident, laughing dreamer. She was a drug-addicted prostitute who didn't believe in love. Edward wasn't a charming billionaire. He was a cold, manipulative businessman. Their story didn't end with flowers and music. It ended in an alley, with him throwing money at her face and driving away. When Disney tested that original cut, audiences were horrified. They didn't want realism. They wanted a fairy tale. And so, Pretty Woman, the version we know today, was born from the ashes of a film that was too real for comfort. The man behind Pretty Woman's original version was Jonathan Frederick Lawton, a 23-year-old struggling writer living in Los Angeles during the 1980s. At the time, he was broke, heartbroken, and surrounded by the rough realities of city life. His small apartment in the Rampart district overlooked alleys filled with drug deals, police sirens, and people just trying to survive. Lawton had already written several scripts, but none of them sold. He was losing hope, doing temporary tech jobs just to afford food and rent. Then a chance meeting changed everything. A Hollywood producer named Gary Goldstein hired Lawton to help set up his new Macintosh computer. Over the next few weeks, Goldstein learned that Lawton was a writer, and eventually he read one of his scripts. He was impressed. That meeting became the start of something big. Goldstein encouraged Lawton to write a story that felt emotional, real and human, not glamorous. Lawton poured his heartbreak, pain, and the desperation he saw around him into a story called 3000. It wasn't about love at first sight. It was about survival and the price people pay to feel something in a world ruled by money. The title 3000 wasn't symbolic. It was literal. The amount Edward paid Vivian for a week of her time. The original 3000 script was raw and painful. Vivian wasn't the smiling red-dressed woman we know today. She was a street worker who had been on drugs for years, her eyes empty, her dreams long gone. She didn't brush her teeth, didn't believe in love, and had lost hope in anything good. Her best friend, Kit, was in even worse shape, coughing blood, slowly dying from addiction. Edward, on the other hand, was not a rescuer, but a symbol of greed and power. He viewed people as assets, not humans. Their relationship was purely a business deal. The tagline of the original movie reflected that darkness. Humiliation is for the shy. Fear is for the innocent. In this world, everyone had a price. There was no fairy tale ending waiting for Vivian. At the end of 3000, Edward threw her out of his car, tossed the money at her, and drove away as she screamed in the street. In one version of the script, Vivian boarded a bus with her friend Kit to Disneyland, not as a dream come true, but as a sad joke, because that was the only kind of fairy tale they could afford. There was no kiss, no rescue, and no love. It was a story about pain disguised as power. When this script reached Disney, the studio was shocked. It was everything they didn't want. Dark, cynical, and brutally honest. When Disney's executives first read 3000, they were appalled. The movie they had bought was far too depressing to ever become a hit. Instead of a touching romance, it felt like a tragedy about greed and addiction. So Disney made a bold choice. They rewrote almost everything. The company brought in Gary Marshall, a director known for lighthearted comedies, and gave him one job: turn this dark story into a romantic fantasy. Marshall's vision was the complete opposite of Lawton's. He wanted laughs, warmth, and charm. In the new version, Vivian became a lovable dreamer with a big heart. Edward became a lonely man who learns to love again. The drug addiction storyline was removed entirely or given to Kit to make Vivian appear more innocent. Even the title changed from 3000 to Pretty Woman, inspired by the Roy Orbison song that gave the film its upbeat mood. In this rewrite, Vivian wasn't humiliated. She was transformed. Instead of being thrown out of a car, she was lifted up a fire escape, kissed, and told she was loved. That scene became one of the most famous romantic moments in movie history. Disney had taken a story about pain and turned it into one about hope, and audiences loved it. Turning 3000 into Pretty Woman wasn't easy. Hollywood's biggest stars were scared of the original story. Before Julia Roberts got the part, many famous actresses, like Michelle Pfeiffer, Daryl Hannah, Winona Ryder, and Patricia Arquette, refused to play Vivian. They felt the script was too degrading and painful. Even male actors like Al Pacino, Christopher Reeve, and Daniel Day-Lewis turned down the role of Edward because of the story's darkness. The first company producing the film, Vestron Pictures, went bankrupt before filming could start, leaving Julia Roberts without a movie or paycheck. It was only when Jeffrey Katzenberg at Disney saw potential in rewriting it that the project came back to life. Casting Richard Gere as Edward was another challenge. He turned down the role several times until Julia Roberts personally wrote him a note convincing him to reconsider. Once the new tone was set, things started to click. Gary Marshall replaced darkness with humor and heart. He told Julia Roberts to imagine herself as Rapunzel waiting to be rescued, and he turned the story into a modern-day Cinderella tale. But even after rewriting, Disney still wasn't sure how the movie should end. They filmed multiple endings. One where Edward leaves, one where Vivian rides a bus to Disneyland, and one where he climbs the fire escape to win her back. When test audiences watched, the choice was clear. They hated the sad versions. They wanted love. When Disney first showed Pretty Woman to test audiences, they tested every possible ending. Viewers reacted strongly, but not to the one the studio expected. Every single time the movie ended sadly, the room went silent. People cried. Some even asked for refunds. They didn't want to watch a woman be used and discarded. They wanted hope. When the now famous fire escape scene played, with Richard Gere climbing up to Julia Roberts' apartment and the music swelling, the audience finally smiled. That was the magic moment. Disney executives immediately knew that was the ending they would use. The studio had originally worried that turning a story about prostitution into a romance would backfire, but the opposite happened. The chemistry between Roberts and Gere was too powerful to ignore. Their connection made people believe in the fantasy. In March 1990, Pretty Woman hit theaters and it became a phenomenon. It earned more than $463 million worldwide, becoming one of the most successful romantic comedies ever made. Julia Roberts became a superstar, and the movie transformed how Hollywood saw romance, even if it came at the cost of the story's original truth. The transformation from 3000 to Pretty Woman wasn't just a rewrite, it was a complete rebirth. The dark script about capitalism and survival was cleaned up, polished, and repackaged into a fantasy about love conquering class differences. Disney replaced drug use and despair with shopping sprees and laughter. Vivian was no longer a victim but a dreamer. Edward wasn't a heartless corporate raider, but a man learning to open his heart. Even the soundtrack, bright and cheerful, reminded audiences that this was a feel-good movie. But the shift also revealed a lot about Hollywood itself. The 1970s had been an era of gritty realism, with movies like Taxi Driver and Midnight Cowboy showing life's harsh truths. By the 1990s, studios were more focused on profits than artistic honesty. They wanted stories that sold, not stories that hurt. Pretty Woman became the perfect example of this change. It turned pain into pleasure, sadness into fantasy, and reality into a dream. The movie's huge success proved that audiences didn't always want realism. They wanted to believe in miracles. Even though Pretty Woman became a global hit, not everyone celebrated it. Many feminist critics argued that the movie sent the wrong message, that a woman's worth comes only after she's accepted by a rich man. They said the movie romanticized a dangerous idea, that a sex worker could escape her life if she was pretty and lucky enough to be chosen. In real life, women like Vivian don't get rescued. They face violence, stigma, and poverty. The movie ignored those truths and replaced them with luxury shopping scenes and designer clothes. Critics also pointed out that the film treated wealth as a solution to everything. It didn't challenge the system as it decorated it. But despite these criticisms, Pretty Woman became a cultural icon. People quoted its lines, sang its songs, and fell in love with its happy ending. The fantasy was too powerful to resist. And maybe, in a world full of pain, people simply needed to believe that love could fix everything, even if it was just for 2 hours in a dark theater. Julia Roberts was only 21 when she landed the role that would change her life forever. At that time, she wasn't yet a household name. She had appeared in Mystic Pizza and Steel Magnolias, but she was far from being an A-list star. When she auditioned for Pretty Woman, Disney executives weren't convinced she could carry such a controversial role. However, director Gary Marshall saw something unique in her. A spark, an innocence that made Vivian not just believable, but lovable. Julia's smile, her laughter, and her ability to make every line feel natural turned what could have been a tragic character into a radiant one. On set, she faced huge pressure. She was acting opposite Richard Gere, already an established name, and she knew the movie's future depended heavily on her performance. During filming, Julia sometimes grew anxious. She once admitted that during the famous bathtub scene, her nerves were so high that she broke out in hives. Gary Marshall, like a father figure, helped her calm down and get through it. He even played music on set to keep the mood light. When the movie was released, the world fell in love with Julia Roberts overnight. Her laughter in the shopping montage, her vulnerability in the hotel scenes, and her emotional sincerity made audiences root for her. Critics compared her to legends like Audrey Hepburn and Grace Kelly, calling her America's new sweetheart. Her performance earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress, and by the next year she became the highest-paid actress in Hollywood. What made Julia's Vivian special wasn't perfection, it was her humanity. She gave dignity to a character the world might have judged. Her version of Vivian wasn't broken, she was brave. That small change in tone transformed a dark, painful tale into one of Hollywood's greatest love stories. Before Pretty Woman, Richard Gere was known for serious roles in American Gigolo and An Officer and a Gentleman. He had the looks and charm, but he wasn't seen as the romantic comedy type. In fact, Gere initially refused the role of Edward Lewis several times. He thought the script was shallow and didn't want to play another cold, rich man. It wasn't until Julia Roberts personally persuaded him that he finally said yes. She famously slipped him a small note during their meeting that read, "Please say yes." That one gesture changed cinematic history. On set, Gere brought an unexpected gentleness to Edward. Instead of playing him as a controlling businessman, he portrayed him as lonely, lost, and quietly kind. He improvised small moments that made Edward feel real, like the scene where he closes the jewelry box on Vivian's hand, making her laugh naturally. That moment wasn't scripted. It was Richard's playful instinct, and it became one of the movie's most iconic scenes. After Pretty Woman, Gere's image changed overnight. He went from being seen as distant to being adored as a romantic lead. Audiences saw a man who could be strong but tender, powerful but vulnerable. The movie revived his career, and he later credited Julia Roberts for that transformation. Their on-screen chemistry was so natural that they reunited a decade later in Runaway Bride, again under Gary Marshall's direction. Gere once said in an interview, "We didn't act chemistry, we just liked each other." And the camera knew. That simple, genuine bond helped Pretty Woman become more than just a movie. It became an emotional experience. Pretty Woman didn't just make money. It changed how Hollywood made romantic films forever. Before its release, romantic comedies were struggling. The 1980s had been dominated by action movies and thrillers. Studios didn't believe love stories could make big profits anymore. Pretty Woman shattered that myth. With its global box office success, it proved that people still craved happy endings. After 1990, Hollywood began a new era of romance-centered films. Sleepless in Seattle, Notting Hill, You've Got Mail, and even The Princess Diaries all followed the same formula that Pretty Woman perfected: an ordinary person finding extraordinary love. The Cinderella complex became a permanent part of the Hollywood dream. Every romantic comedy after that in some way echoed Vivian's story: the outsider who finds love and transformation in a glittering world. However, that influence came with criticism too. Many filmmakers began to copy Pretty